I've misjudged the timing of dusk. It's a very mild October the 28th, and it's also very early. This time of year, now we've altered the clocks, you can have a 4 or 5 hour moth trapping session and still be in bed by midnight. And I probably will be, or at least I'll be home by then. I've come out here because it's so mild this evening, and here at the entrance to Lound, there's just a slight breeze, but I don't think that's going to put things off. At least I hope not. There's been 1 or 2 migrant moths flying around in Nottinghamshire the last few nights. That would be the ideal outcome, to maybe catch something that I've not trapped before. But one possible moth that is very likely here, if I stay long enough and wait long enough, and it's an absolute beauty, maybe we'll get a Merville du jour. Been a year or 2 since I've seen one, and that really would be the icing on the cake, because it's an absolutely super moth. There's at least 1 bat flying around then, that's a start. Hopefully it will leave me a few moths. Well, we do have some moths at the trap, mostly November moths. We've got 4 or 5 November moths. I've got to go around the sheet and have a count yet, but no particular hurry, because I know that there's going to be good numbers of November moths in. But the other moths that have come in, 2 green brindled crescents, always nice to see, and a single brick. Long time since I've seen a brick, or at least I can remember. Used to get them quite regular here, but they seem to have dropped off in numbers over the last few years. But nice to get one of those in. Just hopeful that moths will still be able to fly easily enough with this nagging breeze, and even a bit of drizzle turning up now. Here's me thinking it was going to be dry. What do those weather forecasters know? But all in all, very good conditions for autumnal trapping. Obviously you can have less species to attract as you go through in the autumn and into the first part of the winter, but it is worth trapping if you can get out and about to deciduous woodland or in all the good habitat. You can get some really good trapping sessions in, and if migrant activity is also quite high at the time, who knows what you might get at the light. And that really would be a highlight, to get a nice rare county migrant in here this evening. But the hoped for target species is Merville du jour, and this is usually a good spot for those, and it's an absolute belter. Well, you're not accustomed to one of these scenes really, of me sat in the car, and the reason for that is that it's raining outside, although hopefully the heavy shower which has just gone through in the last sort of 10-15 minutes or so, the worst of it is over us. I'm starting to be able to see the skyline again in the west, and a few of the street lights in the distance. It really came down heavy. I've kept the trap running, or the lights running throughout, protected the generator with an umbrella and sheltered the light up against the back of the car. So hopefully full service can be resumed in the next 5-10 minutes or so. I did debate going home, but I think I'll just give it a little bit longer and see what happens with the weather. No fun packing up when it's chucking it down with rain, but as I mentioned, it seems to have abated now, at least for a bit. Well, this is almost like part 2, or the restart of the trapping session, because the rain really didn't come down, and I had to dispose of the sheet that was on the ground and put a new sheet down. Thankfully I've got a second sheet in the car, so that is dry. It's no good trapping with a ground sheet that is absolutely drenched. Any moths that land on it, the wings get stuck to it, and it's not a good look and not good for the moths, which is the most important thing. So we do now have a dry sheet back down. The light itself is nice and dry. I managed to keep that protected. It has been on pretty much all the time, apart from when I moved or restarted the generator and accidentally pulled the plug out. And so with MV lights, you tend to have to wait sort of 10 minutes, quarter of an hour before plugging the light in again. Otherwise it won't light until it's cooled down sufficiently. So we are back up and running after a very heavy rain shower. Maybe I should think about bringing the fishing umbrella, which I have and has been sat in the shed for years. That may well come in handy and be a useful thing at some time, at least to protect in the event of showers like that. Whether that shower has curtailed a lot of the moth activity for the rest of this evening remains to be seen. We'll see what comes in, but the only other moths that did have come in, Plutella xylostella, which is diamondback moth and technically a migrant, it's a micro moth, and not much else, to be honest, well, apart from another green brindled crescent. So hopefully we may well get a few moths. That would be nice. And it appears as though the rain has stopped for the evening, or at least the foreseeable hour. Well, the moths are just starting to come in again, and quite a surprise really. I don't think it should be, but it surprised me because we're at the end of October, but just had a barred sallow in. Seems a little bit late, but maybe I'm just slightly out of touch, but a nice bit of colour to the proceedings, and hopefully more to come. But another moths that have come in, we've had single Eclaris rhombana and Agonopteryx aranella. That's one that I don't travel that often, although it is quite common. Plutella xylostella, as I mentioned, and we had two red-green carpets in, and here's an interesting one, Diurnia lipsiella. Now most people, or moth trappers at least, will know of Diurnia fagella in the spring. Well, Diurnia lipsiella is its autumnal cousin, and you'll often see it flying on sunny sort of late mornings and afternoons in woodland. And it's not one that really attracted a great deal to light, but it's a nice one to get. Nothing particularly attractive, it's just various shades of brown, but it's the typical Diurnia shape, and a nice moth to get on this evening's list. We're on to about 10 species, maybe on 11, and so hopefully if the rain stops off we can get some decent moths coming in now. It would be nice. The last time I trapped here at Lound, I was talking about the lack of this species. This is a chestnut, immaculate in its finery after having recently emerged, and it's a moth that flies on mild days throughout the winter period. Often the first moth that lights during late autumn, throughout the winter and the first few months of the year. This is a common species in the Sherwood Forest area. It's beautifully marked. They do become quite tatty, some are better marked than others, but one thing they do all have is a rather shiny sheen to the wings, and you can see that is evident here on the wings. But a beautifully marked species. There is dark chestnut, which adds confusion or potential confusion, but this is actually a female chestnut, and there are two in that arrived in the last sort of quarter of an hour, and I was worried about this moth, or the lack of seeing this moth in 2024, but seeing two this evening has made me think that the species is alright after all. And so is this species. Arriving at the same time as the first of 2 chestnuts were these. These are satellites, and if you look closely at the large white dot on each of the forewings of these 2 moths, you'll see that at the side of those white dots are 2 very smaller dots, almost like moons orbiting a planet. Obviously that's how the satellite derived its name, and those spots come in at least 3 colour forms, anything from deep orange to yellow and through to white, to which these 2 are. And this is a species that I haven't recorded this year at all, not even in the early part of the year, at least that I can remember. And 2 immaculate ones dropped in pretty much at the same time and coinciding as the arrival of the 2 chestnuts. A lovely moth, lovely marked moth, not particularly variable. There can be some slight differences to the markings, but nice to see 2 familiar faces. Now here's an absolute beauty. This is a feathered thorn, which can be quite orange, in fact much more orange than the forewings of this one, but that bright orange can go through a range of shades to some that are even paler than this. Very fresh, of course, as has only recently emerged. The larva can be beaten from a number of shrubs, including hawthorn and blackthorn, if I remember right, earlier in the year. Quite easy to get, but it's a really lovely moth to get in these darkening and increasingly cooler autumn nights. It's a species that I've had at home, and if you do trap from a suburban or even an urban setting, you can expect this amongst a few moths that you'll get in the autumn. Very nice to get, and this one is a nice little addition to tonight's species list. So that's feathered thorn, the only one that's in. I did expect a couple more of these, but still nice to get the one. .21:30 and it's still extremely quiet. No moth has come in since that last update half an hour ago, and to be honest, there's no sign of any moths coming in. There's no insects flying around. Even the moths and that are on the sheet and the insects that are around the light aren't doing anything. That's often an indication as to what's happening elsewhere. If moths and insects and flies on the light aren't flying around your light, then the chances are they're not flying anywhere else away from the light. But then all of a sudden you can get a moth come in that makes you scream and shout. And that's how it goes with this hobby. You never know what's going to come in. But it's been nice tonight to have glimpses at least, and to record 2 very familiar old friends in the form of chestnut and satellite. I'm glad that I've seen those, and I've ended up with 3 satellites, all of the white spotted form. Well, that's 2200 hours and there's still very little flying about. I've just had another feathered thorn that's come in, that's made 3 for the evening, and another November moth to add to the total. I think it's 12 November moths I've ended up with, but it's just not really happening. The temperature has dropped a little bit, and so I'm going to pack up now and head off home.